In the interest of being able to ask Brett and Bill and Gene anything, let's get launched. And feel free. I mean, it's very casual. So get up, grab more to drink, more to eat while we're here. My name is Eugene Sepulveda. I'm the CEO of the Entrepreneurs Foundation and one of the directors here at Capital Factory. Some of you may know JD, who heads up our accelerator for Capital Factory. Then in the back is Lee Christie, who does all the heavy lifting for Entrepreneurs Foundation, followed by Molly and Leah. So thank you guys for being here. Thanks for being here. We just want to be able to pull together entrepreneurs periodically. Sure. And these are three very dear friends who have been involved with us for a very long time. Bill Bach, the far end, is the founder of the Entrepreneurs Foundation. I guess with the Dazzle liquidity event, he seeded this so that other entrepreneurs could set aside some equity when they had a liquidity event, and that equity would be available for the company to make grants to nonprofits. We've evolved to include volunteerism, other philanthropy programs, community engagement. We really focus a lot on helping entrepreneurs and their teams build cultures that contribute to success. Gene, I think I met next, who's with Convia. All these guys are on each other's boards, so it's very incestuous here. But Gene, he has a great story, which I'll ask him to tell later, about how he's kind of an accidental culture guy. But if you guys know Convia, and then is now the CEO of Bizarre Voice. And of course, Brett Hurt, who is the founder of Bizarre Voice, founder, CEO, board member of Bizarre Voice for a long time. Very dear friend. And we got to know each other through the Entrepreneurs Foundation. Yeah. Working together on a plan for Bizarre Voice. So it is meant to be very informal. It's meant to be open up for any kind of questions. Shall we start? You guys want to make a couple comments to launch us? We start on this end? I'm going to give you signals from the back so nobody can talk to me.
I didn't have any prepared comments because this was a Q&A session. I'll just start out by saying that, this is, I think, supposed to be a little bit focused on culture. And I do think that culture is an incredibly important thing for a company, from the time that it launches to, hopefully the time that it goes public or sells. And got a lot of insights in that. I write a lot about it on my blog. My blog is lucky7.io, so I'm happy to really dive into any aspect of culture that you'd like to discuss, from how to hire to the best way to promote people to how to get involved in great community organizations like Entrepreneurs Foundation, and why I believe that's very important to do, to all of the tough things too about some of the challenges you may face along the way culturally. So thank you.
Yeah, I don't have much to add other than congratulations on your journeys that you all are on. It's very exciting stuff. I think my kind of mantra as a leader has always been, there are a lot of great strategies out there, but when it comes down to success, it really comes down to execution. And when it comes down to execution, it's always about your team and your people. And when it comes down to your team and people, you have to have a culture that they want to be at work, they want to be there, they want to execute, they want to hit goals. So that's why I think culture is so important. It's because for a company to succeed, you have to execute, you have to hit goals, you have to hit measures, and to do that, you have to have a great culture, because you got to have that team in place and those people in place that you want to circle the wagons with when you have to really make it go.
And I think culture at its core comes down to values, and companies and virtually any form of organization has them. In certain companies, you go to the trouble to actually identify those values and you write them down, and you even hang them on the wall. There are other companies that don't take the time and might not actually perceive they've got values, but if you ask the people, they know. And you can either have a really good value set, or a not so good value set. And I think it's really important if you're in the process of building a company to get on the good side of that equation.
Who wants to start out the first question?
Yes, Isabel.
Yeah. What would you say are the biggest, obstacles that you'll face when building a culture? Like, which ones should you watch out for if you had to make like a list of 3 or 4?
Ah, gosh, that's a good question.
So repeat the question. I'm not sure
Yeah,
if
so
I hear this.
the question is, what are some of the biggest obstacles you'll face when building culture, right? So, well, I mean, on the values front, I mean, just to talk about that one for a moment. At the beginning of Bizarre Voice, we intentionally didn't put down values. A lot of people think that we had our core values from the beginning, but it took a year to even embark on that journey. And the reason is that the first year was all about just surviving. And one thing that we did, I think, really well in that first year was we made hiring the most important priority for the company, and specifically innovated on the way that we hired. So I've written quite a bit about this, but to basically ensure that people would be passionate about the cause, because you can think that you're passionate about something, you can romanticize about something. Like for me, when I was a teenager, I romanticized about playing the guitar like David Gilmour from Pink Floyd, and then I picked up a guitar and I really, really sucked at it, and I realized that it was romance and not reality. Sometimes romance is reality. I've been married 19 years. But in this case, it just wasn't my calling. And I think the same thing is true of companies. And so we, you could think like, wow, right now everybody's making so much money in .com this and .com that, and look at the valuations. And this is the most dangerous time, actually, because you'll see a lot of people that are in very traditional fields jump into .com for the first time and find out exactly how hard it is. So we innovated to create this hiring test where we basically had someone prove to themselves how much they really wanted it. And getting that right and getting the right raw material in the company, because the raw material culture is your people. And then having them to be a part of the company to craft the values together after we had not just survived for a year, but actually really thrived and hit great market fit and saw the company grow quite quickly. We grew from about 0 to about 100 million in the first 6 years of the business. That was the team then where we said, okay, clearly what we've done is working together. Let's together write down the values, because now that we have a working business model, we're going to grow really quickly. And in growing really quickly, we're going to lose this forum where we can all sit around at a couple of tables, and that's the entire company. And so we need to write down the values that we hold most dear right now, so that people that we hire hopefully embody those, and so we provide them as a beacon and a guiding light for those. And the challenges that you face in that is that there will be tests along the way that test those values. And when those values are tested, the way that you behave, especially as a leader in the face of adversity, is incredibly important to set the tone of whether or not those values are just a piece of paper that should be wadded up and thrown away, or whether they are actually being lived. So one of the processes that we developed in our second year is this process for basically scoring management on whether or not we are living the values. And every quarter we used to do a performance review process. That's pretty frequent. We didn't continue that after, I think, the company was 5 years old, but for those first 5 years we did performance reviews literally every single quarter, because things were changing so fast and We wanted people to have, lots and lots of feedback. And if you're a manager, a part of that performance feedback process was staff would rate you on whether or not you're living the core values. And without exception, when you stacked ranked the team, the broad management team, everybody with a manager title or above, I got rated as well as CEO. Without exception, the people that were at the bottom were the people you would have guessed would have been at the bottom. But you had really tangible feedback now on what values they were and were not living, and how. Because values are a very subjective thing. They're aspirational, and behavior speaks, louder than words. And so you would have, a means to then coach them. But I could go on. I don't want to take too much time on this, but I'm sure these guys have a great perspective.
I think that the thing you have to avoid as a leader is trying to arm wrestle the culture yourself. I think the culture evolves from your team, and your job is to say, I really like this about our culture. I like this part of our team. This maybe not. And you don't block what you don't like, but you emphasize what you really like. And but you let it kind of form. So we're a really small company. It's going to take time before you really know what your culture is. Kind of what Brett was talking about. So I think the thing is be a great observer of your culture. Be a great observer about your team, your people, what they like, what they don't like, what kind of information do they like to have, what kind of information they don't want. Talk about how you want to hire people, but let it flow for a while, and don't block anything, but emphasize what you like.
And I guess I would only add that I think culture, like management, gets tested when things go bad.
Right.
This is all pretty easy if everything is up and to the right, but when the product hiccups or the economy glitches or something fundamentally goes bad and the company is at risk, that's when you find out if you've really got a strong culture, if you've got quality management, how the team reacts to adversity is when you really find out.
Very, very true.
Bill, when you talked at last year's CEO Summit, your presentation said, is culture invented, discovered, or developed?
Say again?
Is culture invented, discovered, or developed?
Yeah, what did I say? I think to Gene's point, at some level it's discovered because you create a collection of people, and an element of culture comes out of the mix of people that you put around the table and how things evolved. But I also think that it's developed, and I believe at some level that is particularly true in startup companies, because startup companies tend to take on a personality that is driven from their founder. And I think Bizarre Voice probably derived a lot of its early culture directly from Brett. And I see people sitting around this room who have been in startups with me. We know that has been true, case after case. But ultimately things change, and a culture has to adapt. And to that degree, I think the leadership of the company can set a strong example that will begin to actually translate into the culture of the organization.
And I can give you an example of that. So the financial recession was pretty hard on everybody, and Bizarre Voice wasn't excluded from that. So we underwent, or I enacted at that point in time, a hiring freeze for a very long period of time in the company's history. In hindsight, I wouldn't have done it if I had known how we would have performed during that period. But I was scared, like everybody else, that our whole economy was driving off a cliff here. And in that process, we actually added a couple of additional values. So we had 5 original values. And one of the values that we added during that period of time was generosity. And I actually have this organization to thank for that, Entrepreneurs Foundation, because literally since the beginning of the company, Eugene and I started to talk about how, thanks to Chris Pacitti, actually, he was the one that introduced us, from Austin Ventures. And he introduced us, and we started to talk about how Bizarre Voice could get more involved in outbound generosity, right? Getting more involved with nonprofits and the like. And especially during that financial recession, we doubled down on that and really got more involved. And I would actually say it nourished the entire soul of the company. Maybe even helped us perform, a lot better during that time. And generosity then became a core value because we realized that when you're externally generous, it actually makes you more focused internally on being internally generous. For example, a programmer who drops everything to help someone out in the sales team, or someone in client services who drops everything to help someone out, on the programming team, to really make sure they understand exactly, how the system needs to be improved. So generosity is also not just sitting on your own departmental island and trying to maximize that. It's working across teams and realizing that the whole company has to work together for it to be successful.
Yeah, it's interesting, Brett, that you mentioned in the last recession, because in 2001, when really for the tech community totally, we
totally
drove off the cliff. Stephen and I all of a sudden got extraordinarily busy by tech leaders calling on us and asking to come talk to them. And morale was just, people were on the verge of committing suicide, and some literally, but mostly figuratively. And we just need to lift spirits. And people really turned outward in 2001. You had no time whatsoever before that. Before then, I'd been in a semiconductor company. We couldn't hire any more people, but we had more orders. Our backlogs just kept increasing. But somehow, a lot of tech leaders said, if I'm going to boost morale during this time, we've got to get an outward focus. We've got to look at what we can do in the community, what we can help. And it was right after, you guys will remember the 360 Summits. So we were launching for that because EF had just started up, the Idea Network had started up. I had thought about both of those recessions. Part of the antidote that allowed us to keep morale from going even lower was about having an external focus.
I remember during this most recent downturn, wasn't that long ago, watching CNBC and Jamie Dimon literally pounding the table, and he's like, "Get out of the bunker, guys! Get out of the bunker! Get in front of your clients! Go to the conferences! Stop this nonsense of not traveling! Like, get out of the bunker and lead!" It's like this plea to all the fellow CEOs in making, and it was very memorable because he's a very colorful, very animated, very passionate CEO.
Next question.
Is there such thing as work-life balance? And what does it look like? If it exists?
So yes, the short answer is, okay, so is there such thing as work-life balance, and what does it look like? So let me just tell you a little bit about my story.
It's easy.
So when I started at Core Metrics, my company prior to Bizarre Voice, I was 26 years old, recently married, and my wife helped me start the company. And we worked till 11 p.m. on Saturdays. And then we thought, and Doug actually remembers that because Doug was there. He worked for Core Metrics at that time. And we just worked an insane amount of hours, but in hindsight, I realized we were working dumb to learn how to eventually work smart. And I believe that everybody has to earn their stripes, unfortunately, and go through it, because I just earned my MBA, but there's no teacher-like experience. And you have to live it to really, really learn it. You can have a bunch of theoretical case studies and everything else, but once you've actually been through it, then you learn. And when I started, we didn't do that the whole time, but we did that for years. When I started Bazaar Voice with Brent, my co-founder, I had something very new in my life. In my arms, had a baby girl, our first child. And I had put in a lot of dues before and learned a lot. Coremetrics was one of the only 1999 backed venture companies that actually survived the dot-com crash. And eventually sold for about $300 million to IBM. It was a really tough journey. I was living in Silicon Valley from 2000 to 2003, so I was there when it really hit the fan. And you'd walk into a Starbucks and no kidding, the barista would say, "Yeah, I used to work for pets.com. I was the director of marketing." And I said, "Whoa, this is really, really an interesting period, really tough period." And I made a commitment that I would be there for her like my parents were there for me. And I took throughout every year at Bazaar Voice, I personally took about 4 to 6 weeks of vacation time. And I was there, I made a choice to be there for every important moment in her life and later our son's life. And I believe that in those moments where, especially where I was not so nose to the grindstone, and again, looking in hindsight at Coremetrics, I think that nose to the grindstone, so close, you lose perspective and you lose objectivity. And part of your goal in a company is to maintain objectivity, not become, unpassionate or anything about it, but try to look at it as objectively as you can. And in those moments, when I was on vacation, that's usually when I would come up with the most gut-wrenching decisions that I need to make. Like an executive, for example, that was constantly ranked at the bottom, on the core values, and I needed to finally call the ball and move on. And in those moments too, to challenges about culture, those were the moments where people are like, yes, they're going to live the values. Because you'd find out in those moments that there were many people that were, as they say, suffering in silence. And so I personally think it's a choice, but there's nothing I can kind of instill in you. There's no kind of matrix download on experience. You have to live it, and the younger you are, the less encumbered you are, like you don't have children, etc. The more hours you're going to work, and hopefully, if you time it right, you'll have paid your dues where you've learned how to work smarter for when that event comes along and you can make that choice.
I think it's a tone from the top thing, to be honest with you. I think the team will respond to how you set a tone for work-life balance. I do not let employees miss soccer games and recitals and those types of things. I always tell them I'll be here tomorrow. But at the same time, I have expectations for deliverables and timing and those types of things. But work-life balance is really going to be in the eye of the beholder, meaning the employee, because they're going to come into a culture and they're going to see this is how things get done, and this is crunch time, and this is not when it's not crunch time, and say this works for me from a lifestyle standpoint. Because what I think work-life balance is and what you think work-life balance is may be two very different things is the challenge. And so it's kind of about fitting a culture and having a leader that says, we've got to go get things done, but at the same time, I want you to have perspective on life, because there's a lot of things in life you don't want to miss.
I can be much briefer. No, there's not such a thing. And I'm only partially joking. You know, I think that you get into these companies and work will dominate. And I know you're all feeling it. I mean, you all see it. And I think that it's a challenge to really make that balance and strike it. So in the early going, it's extremely hard. And,
Very hard.
And I think, generally speaking, work dominates.
And I will say this, just to follow up. You know, there is, so if you're hiring for passion, right, and you're hiring people that are very naturally passionate about the cause and have expressed that, then they're going to do what it takes, even if they're gone, physically gone out of the building, to get the job done. I don't believe in cultures where you kind of walk around the office and see who's left at 6. Because if we did that in the early days of Bazaar Boys, there wouldn't have been that many people, but they were all online. They'd all gone home, you know, gone to work out, spend time with their family, and bam, we're all, I mean, you would just see emails going till all hours of the night. And so if people are naturally passionate about the cause, then they're going to express that. And when I was gone on vacation, I would always keep the balls rolling, and it does come from the top. And you know, I wanted to set the tone that these moments were very important with family, but it wasn't like I was camped out, you know, completely off the grid. I found that working an hour or two a day to keep all the balls rolling was really important.
People that are successful are not putting in 45-hour weeks. I haven't met one yet.
Yeah.
You know, it's just one of those things in our business and tech. Right? You're putting in a lot of hours. It's just the way it is. But you can get things done.
Most of you are really screwed. Because when Gene and I started, you couldn't work all the time. Because if you weren't at the office, it was really hard to work.
Could be you weren't online.
I mean, it was really hard to work. And you know, this
Vacations, you actually were on vacation.
right? Because there was no other thing you could do. So you guys don't believe that.
You were
I
carrier
know.
pigeon in the air. To say
I want to add on.
You also had to use fax machines. So.
I want to add on to all of them, but this one I have to, because when I took this job, Mark Seraph called me and said, come see me. If you guys don't know, Mark Seraph was one of the 3 founders of AOL. A good friend. He lives here in Austin. He used to live out on the lake. I had to drive out toward the lake. And Mark says, okay, now that you're going to take over EF, go tell people to start early. Start building culture, start making sure that their families understood the culture of the companies. Because I did, all my companies were very successful, except that everyone was divorced by the end of the day. Because, and what I learned, and Steve Case taught him this, is make the family members part of the culture of the company, so that they understood why the spouses were working 6 days a week, 14 hours a day, at least, so that they were invested in the success. He says that was the only time that he didn't have more casualties than successes as far as families. So I think that what they're saying, none of these are mutually exclusive. It's an old friend who told me, if you want to have fun while you're working, just make all your friends your work. That it's connected, so that you're always doing both.
The advantage we have up here with age is that, and I often tell people this, I now know the stuff that I have to pay attention to, and I also know the stuff that can wait. And 10 years ago, everything needed attention, right? And so that's how I define work-life balance now. I probably work as much as I ever have, but I now know the stuff that I can get in deep shit if I'm not, don't pay attention. The other stuff, this can wait. If it waits a day or two, it's fine. Nothing will.
But at their age, you got to get to 10,000 hours.
You guys don't, as you were building your company, because I've been there with careerbuilder.com. I was employee 6 at CareerBuilder, and everything was a fire. Everything we had was a fire, and it was very tough to kind of weed through the priorities. But so just get old quick, and you'll figure it out.
Next question.
So how do you guys or what techniques do you use to keep people in the company high, like keep the morale high, right? Do you find there's like kind of a method for setting goals, or you feel like you can achieve those goals and you can kind of reward them for that, or is there some sort of loop that you use for that to keep the morale high on a daily basis?
Start on this in this time, Bill. You want to start?
That's an interesting question because we just completed an employee survey that sort of spoke to this issue, principally in our engineering organization. And one thing shocked me that, sort of the most significant motivation for being part of the company and staying with it was its culture and its strategy. And not far behind it was pride in your coworker. So hiring standards that really kept the bar high meant you're surrounded by really smart people, and that's just a fun place to be. And if you've ever worked in an organization that didn't have that dynamic, you know how frustrating it can be. But when the organization is high quality kind of across the board, it's a true pleasure.
Yeah, I mean, I've seen all kinds of different engagement scenarios with employees. Bizarre Voice is an interesting company, right? We just celebrated our 10th anniversary, and as Brett described, it was one of the fastest growing companies, went public on the least amount of raised capital the first 6-7 years, and the last 3 years have been a real struggle for the business, right? And I'm in there trying to turn it around. I'll share the stories of Bizarre Voice later on if you want, but when I joined Bizarre Voice, the attrition was 40%, which I'd never seen before. 40%, that's a lot. You lose a lot of people doing that, right? And when I really dig down into the soul of a company, it's, morale and engagement are two things in my opinion. They believe in the mission, they believe in what you're doing matters as a company, right? And the second thing is they believe in their leader or leaders, right? They believe in their immediate manager if you're a large organization. If you're smaller, it's the founder and what's going on there. I mean, those are the two things. It's not pay. I mean, pay is important, but it pays down the ranks a little bit. They believe it's the team. It's who they and the mission of the business. And one of the things when I went into BV was we didn't really have a game plan. We were kind of doing the things we've already done, but we didn't really have a future. We didn't really talk to what we're trying to accomplish as a business. And we've done that now. Attrition's cut in half, which is still a little elevated. And we still is higher than we like, but it's much improved, and engagement in the company is much higher. And so my belief is, now that a survey is saying how engaged our employees are, that performance is around the corner, is my belief. It's going to take some time, but it's around the corner. But it comes down to, do we believe in the business? Do we believe the business has good prospects? And do we believe in my manager or small company, the founder? That's what I believe.
What do you think led to the attrition rate to 40%?
Well, we went through 3 CEOs in 15 months. Brett left the business in 2012. We kind of did a battlefield promotion of the CFO to the CEO. It was a bad fit. And then I came in about a year later. So a lot of change there. The company had an acquisition that was deemed illegal by the Department of Justice, right? So a lot of crazy stuff that happened. So I think that was what really did it, is, what's going on? I don't know if I believe anymore. It used to be Brett, now it's this other guy. Here comes Gene. What's going on? That's tough. Changing leaders, everybody, I firmly believe that everybody's replaceable, right? I think all 3 of us would say that. But you have to expect a wave when you replace someone on your senior team. There's going to be ripple effects. And when it's a CEO, and the CEO, in the case of Brett, right after the company had a very high profile public offering, and replaced by someone that, a lot of people suspected may not have been the right choice to be the next CEO. That's kind of gets stuff started.
But CEO change always creates this dynamic. So, we've seen them in Austin-based small companies, and my company's on its 4th CEO, and each change has produced, drama. Each change has produced a tweak in the culture, and a definite change in the strategy. So employees have to get comfortable with that. But I was at HP when Carly Fiorina came in. You talk about change. This is a company that had been in existence for already 50 or 60 years, and they did things the HP way, the way Dave and Bill had laid it out. And Dave and Bill still had offices, even though they were both long dead, right in corporate headquarters. And Carly, who now wants to be your president, came in and started making change in a very difficult setting, because nobody in the management team believed there was anything broke.
And she went after every sacred cow.
Oh, absolutely.
And killed herself doing it.
Yes, absolutely. But CEO change will create, a dynamic, and that will be true whether your company is 50 people or 50,000.
Yeah, the only thing I would add to that is just that definitely, who the person reports to and whether or not they're getting inspiration from that person, and that person is qualified to lead them, and that person is someone that they're learning from, is probably the most important thing. Probably the second thing for a startup is whether or not that person is in a role that's constantly challenging them. And people go to startups for a reason. And it's not just about the equity upside. They go to startups to create something from scratch. And as a result of that, if you keep people in the same roles too long, you're going to churn people. The best examples at Bizarre Boys, in that 7.5 years that I was CEO, you would see people that literally, I just had drinks with one on Friday, the head of our Australia office, Zach Hotchkiss. He's now been in 8 roles. So you'd see people change roles like every year, and he's been there 9 years. He outlasted basically me, my co-founder, everybody. And you see them constantly get a new role every year, and that is by design. That's not just because they're an amazing performer. It's also by design. You're looking for that so that people are constantly getting a new challenge. So that's another thing to watch for.
I'll go back to my first comment about values. Silicon Labs will celebrate its 20th anniversary next year. And we went through an exercise in our strategic planning process last fall to revise or update the company values, which had been written down by the 3 co-founders almost on the day they started the company. This is who we want to be. We discovered that while they all sort of felt right to us, to me, I read them, I didn't even know we needed to revise them. Our employee base didn't remember them. There were 6 statements, each was 2 or 3 sentences long. It was kind of hard to get your arms around. And in the exercise we went through, we boiled them down to 4 statements that were very concise that we think employees can now resonate with, and a few more will remember. But when it was all said and done, and I looked at what we came up with at the end, every single element of the original founding values was represented in the revision. Nothing was lost. We added a couple of elements that were new, but all of the original values were retained. And to me, that says through 20 years of history and 4 different CEOs, the things that really mattered stayed. And that's pretty cool.
Culture's like anything in your business needs a review.
Mm-hmm.
Right? You need to review, is the culture still serving us well? Because your culture as a $5 million business is going to be different then 25 and a 50 and 100, just like your leadership team, and you have to decide, is that culture still working for us? When you go public, sometimes you have to make some modifications to your culture because of being able to be your communication, what information you can share. So you always, it's a strategic part of your business, like anything else. Your team, your strategy, your go-to-market plans, all that.
Hey, Sean had the next question.
Yeah.
So would you guys agree with that the CEO owns the culture? Is that his or her one of their primary responsibilities, or can other people?
I would say that it's my belief, at least, that the CEO should be the chief culture officer, and should live it to the greatest degree, like hold themselves personally accountable to live it to the greatest degree, because you're on the stage just by design, way we're wired in America, everything else, way we study our politicians or the major actors, actresses, etc. And if the CEO is not leading the culture, I mean, I'll give you an example of one of the things that happened with the promotion of our CFO to CEO that shocked me when I was on the board at the time. He left for vacation with 2 weeks left to go in the quarter and was gone for that 2 week period.
In the year,
And the end of year, and we were shocked on the board. I mean, that was like, the ultimate violation, essentially, of hold on, we're in this to be together as a team, et cetera.
But it's good work-life balance.
It was not even that.
now he has really good work.
Yeah. So it was so that that type of statement, and ultimately the culture did reject him and embrace Gene.
I think I'm a little different from Brett on this. So I definitely think the CEO has to live the culture. No question about it. It has to be someone that everyone says he or she embodies the culture. But one of the things I have found as CEO, as hard as I try, and I'm very open, very transparent with my team, etc., is that you still, as you get bigger, probably not the challenge you all face now, but as you get bigger, you don't always get the straight scoop, right? People don't want to tell you the bad news. And so, for me to be the chief culture officer, I need to know the good and the bad and the ugly. I need to know it all. And so I typically have designates in my team that kind of are my eyes and ears around, are we living to the culture? Is the culture working for us the right way? That's how I operate. I definitely live it. I totally agree with them on that. I wouldn't call myself the chief culture officer because I kind of delegate that out to my HR team and some other people. And then I typically kind of really get the real what's going on. And because I do care. I mean, I ask a lot of questions about our culture. There's no question. Brett and I share the same belief in the importance of it. But I also think that, I don't get all the straight answers when I ask direct questions sometimes.
Gene, tell your story about when you were at Convio, when you tell about you weren't always a culture guy.
No. I was
It's because he's a sales guy.
in 2004, so I joined Convio in 2003 as a $5 million company that was kind of going sideways. It dealt with the nonprofit market, and basically we helped nonprofits use web technologies to engage constituents better, raise money, etc. So if you guys have walked in races and stuff like that and you give online, you're probably using Convio's technology as an example. So when I got there in 2003, 2004, I was a capitalist pig. Right? So I was all about, stock price, return on equity, go, all that stuff. And I firmly believed that the secret to success was winning. The company wins, everybody wins. That's kind of it. And so I didn't have a balance, right? And that came to me in the 90s because I was at careerbuilder.com. I was employee 6 at careerbuilder.com. And we took that public. And in the 90s, everybody had your ticker symbol crossing your laptop every so often. And it was all about stock price, Netscape craziness, And what I didn't realize after the bust in 2000 was that everybody's perception of what was good and what was balance had changed, and I hadn't changed. I was still thinking about stock price and all that. Everybody else was much more oriented towards, having a great team, and more importantly, giving back, getting involved in the community more. Because there are a lot of people that were affected by the challenges around the turn of the century, and people really aspired to give back. So one of the things that impacted me the most about culture was, and this was back out of my capitalist pig mind, was somebody came up with the idea, let's take a week off as our company and go help nonprofits. And so the CEO and me went, yeah, that's a great idea, because we'll get to know all our customers and we'll make better products and all that stuff will be awesome. Just be great. We'll be a better company. And what happened when we did that, we and it still goes on, is we became a better team. We became a better company. We became better with each other, and we had a much more sense of a balance towards life. It wasn't work-life balance, it was priorities. What is life really about? Sure, there's work, but there's so much more than that in life, and everybody had a better perspective and a healthier view of the world, and it made for a better team. And so that changed me forever, right? I mean, that changed me forever. I was a far right, red is red, conservative, capitalist pig, and now I'm clearly in the middle, because I see, I still have passion about a lot of causes that I knew nothing about 10 years ago. But more importantly, I realize that one of the things you need to realize as a leader is that it'd be great if everybody thought like you, but they don't. And you will make that assumption that everybody sees this problem exactly like I do. I mean, this is so simple, it's right here. And if you have 50 people, you'll have 20 opinions. And so it's okay. But that's the kind of thing that got me to think that way. But understand that I'm not always right, A, and B, there are a lot of different perspectives about how to build a great company. It's not all about your stock price and winning.
Well, this epiphany occurred to the Entrepreneurs Foundation itself. When EF was launched, it had a single mission, and it was effectively a financial model. So those of you who are members of EF have contributed equity to the organization into a donor-advised fund. And the original mission of EF was to, solicit that equity for the good of the community, put it in the bank, if you will, let the companies go back to work, and when a liquidity event occurred, voila, we would have capital to deploy to nonprofits that were deserving in this community. It was not long after that model was launched that we began to find startup company demand for community involvement. They started to look to EF for support, and how do we engage and do volunteer programs and get really involved with the community, not financially because we don't have any money. We're working on venture capital investment dollars, but we've got our arms and our legs, and we'll devote some time. And it led to the whole community involvement program that EF has been known for now for the last 10 years. And, it was much the same.
Yeah.
It was this, the view that, okay, the financial model is really important, but there's so much more.
One of the best, some of my best memories of tech in Austin are the volunteer days of EF. And again, as a small organization with 5, 10 of you, it's not the same dynamic, but as an organization of 100 to 200, and I'm out there, painting with the guy in support, and it's just we're doing things together, and you get to know people on a totally different level. Nobody's a CEO, nobody's a marketing person. We're all just trying to help, and those are just great memories I will always have. We did a bunch of them with Eugene's team, and it's a really important part of Austin also. I mean, what we do here is really unique, these types of things. It's really, really important part of, as your company comes up, to get involved in the community. Your employees care about that stuff a lot more than you think, or maybe you do. No.
One of the funniest things we ever saw was when Austin Ventures came out to do a day. It's never happened before, never happened again, but all the partners were there. And they were painting Lee wasn't with us, and they were.
I want to see Ken DeAngelis do it.
Ken DeAngelis was painting a fucking wall next to, you know, Ronnie or somebody, you know, one of the administrative assistants, and a bunch of these people had never really talked. It was kind of one of the first times, and it was seismic in how it built relationships. Next question.
I was just gonna add my 2 cents to that. The way I would describe it is that I really see a company, whether it's a small company or whether it's a large company, as the embodiment of a person, and that person is the collective of all the people at that company. And if you take that to kind of the extreme and the logical conclusion, then ultimately that person can choose to nourish their soul or choose to not. And there's all types of activities, you know, in your personal life that you can choose to nourish your soul, whether that's, you know, reading books about self-improvement, going to the gym, spending time with your spouse or significant other, spending time with your kids, etc. And there's a lot of people, I'm sure you know, that are very one-dimensional, right? It's all about one thing, one thing, one thing. And those are the type of people you usually don't want to hang around with because they're not choosing to nourish that. And so if a company chooses to nourish the soul, what ends up happening is that it becomes contagious and everybody gets caught up in that, and work itself becomes a lot more fun. I mean, we did, you know, to your point about work-life balance, sure. I mean, I work a tremendous amount of hours every week. I didn't count it though, you know, and that was the key point, is like, I wasn't ever counting the number of hours. I wasn't ever looking and saying, man, I spent, you know, 70 hours this week. We were in the flow, having a blast, doing great things internally, externally for the community. And that's a magical place to be. I mean, that's ultimately what I wish for all of you with your startups as they grow and prosper. And it is a deliberate choice. Part of the reason I said that, you know, the CEO should be the chief culture officer is I think it's a deliberate choice what you decide to emphasize as the CEO. Like Gene, to his credit, embraced that, and the whole team took off a week to do it. He could have easily said no, and bam, we've been shut down right then. And I always made it a point, every time I saw something organic happening in Bizarre Voice, because I don't want you to think that the ideas were coming from me. Quite the contrary. Like 90% of the time, they were coming from the people on the front lines. And it was the people on the front lines that decided to have a Bizarre Voice art competition and show off all of the great artists inside Bizarre Voice. But it was my choice as the CEO to show up, to be there at the art competition after hours, and go around and look at every single piece of art and talk to every single employee about it. That was a choice. And because, you know, you do things like that as a CEO, it says to everybody else, man, this is pretty cool. You know, we've got approval and kind of acceptance for these types of activities all the way, you know, to the CEO. And I think what you choose to emphasize as the CEO says a lot about your values and whether or not you're committed to living those values. Yeah, JD, and then we'll come over here. Russell.
Thanks guys all for coming. What's the most important cultural value? Go.
Do the right thing. When we took, you know, and I think this has been a core value of about 5 different companies that I've worked for. You know, you need to talk about customers, you need to talk about talent, you need to talk about economic success. You know, what I think has been the strongest statement that people in the organization can really resonate with is that we're just going to do the right thing. And, you know, the company, any company is faced with a tug of war between employee issues, customer issues, and investor issues. And they are not always aligned. They often conflict. So, you know, as a manager or an individual contributor in the company, you're regularly faced with uneasy choices that are not black and white. They're usually gray. So you have to do your best to figure out what's right under this set of circumstances. And just apply that rule. And to me, that's the core value.
I would say transparency / authenticity, meaning tell the team what's going on. The team wants to know what's going on the bridge. You're the bridge, you're the CEO, the founder. They want to know what's going on. They want to know what you're thinking. They want to know what's working, what's not. Be honest with them. Tell them good and the bad. A lot of people don't want to tell them bad news. I found that in BV. A lot of people did not feel like the real situation in the company was being communicated. And I dropped all those and just said, look, this is what's working, this is what's not. And it empowers people beyond your belief when they feel like, okay, well, let's go fix these problems. Thanks for telling us.
Yeah, I would say it's passion. I would say it's making sure that you have the team, and therefore the people that actually form the culture that are really passionate about the cause and expressing that passion in lots and lots of different ways. Passion can also be misguided and misunderstood, but I think at the end of the day, if you have people that are truly passionate about being there, being with each other, living the mission of the company, being with the clients, then it's really hard to lose when you have that. And in Bizarre Voice's best days, the passion was just unbelievable. I mean, Bizarre Voice won the #1 place to work when it was a small company. It won #1 when it was a medium-sized company. It won #1 when it was a large company. All of that happened in 7 years, and people could see it. I mean, you can tell passion in a company. There's a very easy test for it. Just go walk the halls of any company. If you sense that it gives you a tremendous amount of energy to be there and be around the people, then you're in a workforce where people are really passionate about being there. If you go walk around Zappos, you go walk around Bizarre Voice, you're gonna get a sense of people that really want to be there, that are really passionate about the cause, and that's just not something you can fake. I mean, you can put whatever you want on core values, but ultimately you can sense it. And I've been in big companies where I walk around and I can't wait to leave. You know, it just sucks the energy right out of you, and you think, man, you know, thank God I'm at a startup.
That's really interesting. You guys have 3 different answers to that question.
I think they're all related. I mean, openness was going to be
See, passion would be
my second one.
Passion would be my #1 hiring criteria. Give me someone who's very motivated. I can teach you how to fish, but I can't teach you how to be pumped up and go after it. I can't teach motivation. I can teach you how to sell. I can teach you how to. I can't teach you how to program. But I can teach you how to do a lot of things. But I can't. Passion would be my #1 hiring criteria.
But, you know, that's why management and culture are an art, not a science.
Yeah.
You know, we're all going to have different points of view, and there's no one right answer.
How do you, when you're interviewing people, especially early on with your 5 or 10 people, how do you figure out who has the true passion for your business versus who wants your stock or a job and doesn't? You know, how do you, when you're interviewing people, you get a subset of what their real personality is outside of an interview? How do you figure out who's got the passion for your business?
Well, the only way I found to do it was to actually test them. Because you can't just tell in an interview, and everybody would say do behavioral interviews, and you know, Google used to have the process where they had all these crazy questions and, you know, all these algorithms, you know, typical Google fashion to find out, you know, who to hire. And now they've kind of doubled down. They've done away with that, and there were lots of articles about that at the time. Now they've gone really deep on behavioral interviewing. And I think behavioral interviewing is great, and definitely something we always did at Bizarre Voice. But unless you actually test them in the face of alternatives, I don't think you can really know. And by testing them, there was a story that I shared with my co-founder when we were talking about, well, how are we going to find these, people that are really passionate? Because a lot of people can fake it and everything else, or maybe they don't know. Kind of like my guitar example. And one of the things that I observed at Core Metrics, the company I started prior, is that when I was in the field with a salesperson and I saw them present for the first time, I was usually able to call the ball. I wouldn't tell anybody, but I would just kind of write down my thoughts on whether or not that person was going to be someone that was able to be successful. And I was right about 90% of the time, but unfortunately we had a rate of about 50% success. And I proposed to the VP of sales, I said, hey, why don't you start testing them up front? Like have them present, and do a mock audience and just see, how they do and that. And he really resisted that. He was like, look, I've been hiring enterprise software salespeople for a long time. We get these people from Oracle that have this and that quota and, achievement versus it, and we'll be fine. But I'm like, yeah, but we're wrong 50% of the time. And he said, well, go out there and ask other people about that. And so I asked other CEOs and they said, it's all a numbers game. Yeah, it's 50% for us too. Just put more people through the funnel. I thought, gosh, what a sad state of affairs. So you're like, put a bunch of people through the funnel, know you're going to be 50% wrong. You've got a massive opportunity cost associated with that because you got 6 months where you could have been selling stuff and you weren't. You've got, the embarrassment on both sides, and it's not great for anybody. And so we tested it out at Bizarre Voice, and we said, all right. From our first hire was Paul Rogers, who's now the CTO of Retail Me Not. And we hired him as CTO. And we had told Paul about the company. He interviewed extremely well. It came very highly referred from Chris Himes, who was the CTO of Trilogy and the head of engineering at Indeed now. And we said, Paul, there's just one more thing we'd like you to do. We'd like you to basically work on what you think would be the ideal architecture for our solution today, and then how that'll change over the next 3 years. And Paul, at the end of that, a week later, he said, man, I spent like 40 hours on that. And he took us through it, and our jaws were just dropping. We're like, oh my gosh, this guy is amazing. Like, he really described it incredibly well. It was clear he put in, the 40 hours. And then Paul shared with us, he's like, I've never done anything like that for any company. And that's the key. That's where when someone can say that, I've never done anything like that to get a job, well, they clearly had lots of alternatives. And Paul Rogers was, according to Joe Lamont back then, the #1 engineering manager that had ever worked at Trilogy. And so, Paul could have got a job anywhere, but he chose to spend 40 hours. And then we did the same thing with salespeople. We'd hit them on a Friday. Congratulations, you're a finalist. We just need you to do one more thing. Come in on Monday and pitch us like we're a prospect. Do the deck from scratch. We'll role play the entire time. Tell us which prospect to role play. Good luck. Now, later on, when we got good at knowing the stats on this, we'd say, and by the way, around 50% of the time people fail this part of the process. So we encourage you to take it seriously. It's interesting that it turned out to be about 50%. So that's the only way I found. I think you can do behavioral hiring and reference checks. I think you should do all those deeply, but I think unless you actually test someone's passion, if they're willing to go for it, you just will not know. It's my opinion. Or at least I haven't figured out the way. Maybe you guys have figured out the way, but I haven't figured out the way other than doing that.
Another question?
I'm curious, have you, the cases where you've done that, you've been so sure at the time, you hired them, you think they're going to be all-stars, and they wind up being duds. What has there been any kind of correlation to why that happened for the few cases when it probably did?
So we were wrong 10% of the time, so we weren't right 100%. And there were lots of reasons. I remember having this conversation with Tony Capasso, who is now the head of sales over at Civitas. And we were his first enterprise sales job. So he was a CEO of a nonprofit company. And by the way, the test actually allowed us to hire some non-traditional people. Like we didn't just go, oh, they sold at Oracle or whatever. And because it would give us confidence, it'd be like, you know, maybe this will be the time where, you know, everybody needs a first chance. And I had this conversation with Tony at the time. It was a very awkward conversation where I said, Tony, I said, I just want to mark time, you know, I mean, you like ace the test, you know, everybody wants to argue, but I just want to mark time because you've never sold enterprise software before. And I said, there's either one of two things that are going to happen here is my sense. Either one, I think you're going to become the best salesperson at the company. Or two, this is going to be a horrible experiment. And a month later, you know, we're going to end up parting ways. And we kind of laugh about that now because he ended up becoming one of the top performers and, you know, eventually went in management. Now, as I said, leading sales very well at Civitas. So, you know, sometimes we take those risks and we're wrong. And then the most common pattern I would see is that maybe they were really, really great at the test, but they were inconsistent performer. So you'd see flashes of just absolute brilliance where you'd be like, oh my gosh, this person is amazing. And then other times, the same person where they would really just completely bomb in a client presentation or at a real core task. And that's the most frustrating type of culture test is when you have people that sometimes are nailing it and sometimes aren't. Because then it's a question of how long do you continue to invest. And in all those cases, every manager I've ever met always says, boy, I wish I had moved on, you know, 6 months ago. But it's those where it's inconsistent, and that's just tough. I mean, there's no easy way in that situation around it.
Let's do this. Let's take one more question, and then we've still got more alcohol and food and time that and people can be one-on-one. So
Eugene, let me try another answer to this.
Okay.
One. I mean, at the highest level, you know, I would recommend that you do extensive multi-person interviewing of any candidate. I'd recommend it's cross-functional, so it's not uniquely within the department or the organization that's hiring the individual. So if it's an engineer, make sure they're talking to a marketing person or a cross-functional interview team. Have that interview team meet to decide and debate the candidate before you make the offer decision. Reference check ruthlessly. And not the candidate's references, but others that you dig out. And then when you're wrong, cut your losses really quick.
Totally agree.
The little voice in your head is right more often than not.
Also true.
When you're sitting there going, your team's going, I kind of liked him. I really like him. And you're sitting there going, oh no, that's right. That's what I have found.
Yeah, that's
More often than not.
Yeah, there we go.
Can you talk about the teaching moments? So when you are working with employees and they screw up, and you can use that as a teaching moment or something that you let them go. Can you sort of walk through examples of how you dealt with that and what you did?
Your best teaching moments are when you screw up and admit it. You know, it's revealing to your team, when you've made a choice, you've made a decision, it didn't work, it's wrong, you've got to admit that, that didn't work. And then regroup and go again. And, I think that anybody in a management role is going to have these cases because you need to decide and go. not sit around and wait to collect enough data to be sure you're right every time, or you'll never do anything. So, you can really do a great job of, coaching or communicating if you admit your own mistakes as you go down the road.
I think that the thing that I spend a lot of time with in both organizations that I've been a CEO, Convio and here, is that I make it really clear that it's okay. It's okay to bring me into a disaster, right? I understand. I've been there. I've made disasters myself. I've been a part of them. And just do a couple of those, meaning like a client escalation, really unhappy with them. And a lot of people would, no, don't send it to Gene. But a lot of times if I reach out to the customer and make a phone call, 50% of the problem goes away, right? Okay, CEO's involved from the customer standpoint. But they get so worked up about it. And you have to make it very clear, this is okay. Now if it, 6 times from the same account, same person, now we got a problem. But most of the time it's a teaching moment. It's let's talk about what happened. And they once they realize, hey, you're kind of sitting down next to me versus standing up looking over my shoulder, then it becomes a teaching moment. But to Bill's point, we're all human, we've all screwed up. And for the employee to see the leader of the company engaged in a pile of crap and wanting to help is very motivating to a lot of people. And so just remember that those are, you hate them, you don't like unhappy customers, but they pay off usually in the end if the employee, takes it the right way. So.
I've seen a culture where it was be a one and done scenario, like one mistake and you're out. And it was the oddest thing. It was visiting a client I won't name. Well, never turned out to be a good client, by the way. So I don't think it's a client today, but it's the craziest thing. So we're in the conference room, and he starts yelling about, he wants to show us a slide, and he starts yelling about the fact that he can't get his connector working. And he starts picking up the phone and dialing executives, and literally the entire executive team, CFO, you name it, it's like $1 billion company, no kidding, is in there like, trying to fix his laptop. And I went to lunch with some of the guys. This guy actually happened to like me for some reason, I'm not exactly sure, but I didn't go to lunch with him, but I went to lunch with some of his team members, and I was just feeling kind of candid, and I was just like, why do you guys put up with this? And they were like, well, he's the only option, and I won't even mention the state, in this state for high tech, and we just it's like one said I've left 3 times and I just keep coming back. So I do think that, look, the most important thing is in those moments, the way you behave will ultimately set the tone of whether or not you're going to have a culture where people can bring you the most disastrous situations to help with. And you do have trouble as a CEO getting the straight scoop on things. And so if you show that you're willing to roll up your sleeves and get engaged in the toughest situations. There was a time in Core Metrics where literally our whole solution was blowing up, and I just went on a roadshow. It was, at the beginning of the company, I just went on a roadshow to every single client, and with the sales team, with the client services team, and looked them in the eyes and apologized and promised them we're going to make it right. And that was a turning point. If we hadn't done that, I'm pretty sure all of our clients would have left us during that period. So definitely, having the fearless vulnerability to be able to come out and say that you made mistakes and be really explicit about it is incredibly important.
Anger is not your friend in the workplace. And people will get angry, and there are a lot of CEOs known for ripping new ones, and it's very ineffective, in my opinion, right? It's just, if you can get people pay attention into your emotion, they don't pay attention to your message. Your message being delivered in a very calm, straightforward way is always way more effective, and usually always best done one-on-one to the employee versus in a group setting.
Yeah. The one exception I've seen to that is when the company just has a completely superior business model and market opportunity. And that's the ones where people get really confused and unfortunately get really bad examples. Like a hedge fund that just has, the best proprietary, algorithm or whatever else. I've seen some with just absolutely disastrous cultures and just, total Machiavellian behavior all the way around, and people take from that and I think draw some wrong conclusions and say that's why they're successful. And the real reason they're successful is because they literally hit on the one genius thing that, that is proprietary, and usually they're not successful for long.
Thank you guys. Let's stick around, and if you guys can be around for another half hour or so.
Sure. Yep.
Fantastic. Thank you so much.